Well, number one is as they're wrapping up a show, you always get the host will tell about your social media, the next book you're going to have come out, and they're bragging on you. They're setting you up for success. They're going to wrap up their show, but they want to make you look like a rock star. The best thing you could do at the end of the show is very simple. Anyone can do it, is smile. But what we do is we talk over the host. As they're wrapping us up and landing the plane, we have to say, by the way, hi, Mom, or, oh, one more comment, one more thought. You need to pull back and literally just smile. Otherwise, you are destroying the gift they're giving you of making you look good and sound good at the very end of everything.
It's interesting, those positioning statements, when you hear them for the first time. I've had guests, I've had hosts do it really well for me, and I sit there and I smile because they've done it so well. I'm like, wow, I feel great.
Well, that's exactly how it should be. And the people that are on my show, I tell them, my gift to you is I'm going to help you shine. I'm going to set you up for success. And we sabotage that when we jump on either the beginning or the end. We jump on the host and then we take away the gift they're giving us.
I think there's a lot of ignorance in the marketplace as well, where people don't understand the importance of a personal brand. And if you've got a great host who understands branding and positioning, they put a lot of thought into that. It's not something that they're just throwing out there on the fly. It's something that they've planned throughout the whole show. So in connection with that personal brand, how does that impact the brand? You get to the end of the show, you talk over the host, you dilute what they've said. How does that impact the brand?
It makes you look like an amateur. And what you want your brand to be is rock star, high octane, expert, and you sabotage everything you did for the 10, 15, 30-minute interview you did. Your brand story is so key to what you do in these interviews, in these discussions. But now that you've bragged yourself up, you've talked about your services, you've talked about what you do for people, again, all you have to do is smile at the end and let the host do everything else for you. It destroys everything you did prior to that last moment.
I've seen the reverse take place as well, where people have been on their own podcast or on their own live stream, and in the opening comments they say, I just want to tell you that, I'm not an authority or I'm not an expert in this area, but I want to share some insights. If I hear those two things, I'm not an authority, I'm not an expert, I'm out. I'm on to the next channel. What's the impact of that on the brand?
Oh, it's huge because you're telling them right away, I don't know anything I'm going to talk about for the next amount of time. You're literally saying, I didn't prepare. I don't know this information. So why should I even tune in? Why should I listen to you? And as a guest on a show, one of your areas, and again, the other area that you could fumble the ball on, you have not set the host up with your bio, your information, the first 5 questions. You need to set them up so when they do that introduction that you're talking about, they make it sound like they are that smart. You've helped them as a guest to sound smart before you get on the air. Partly it's the guest's fault for not setting them up well, and partly it's the host's fault for not doing their job.
Many years ago, I worked with Brian Tracy, and I went to his Speakers Academy, and he was showing me the importance of having a structured conversation. And after the 3 days training with him, he said to me, Daniel, he said, the next thing that you need to do now is to work on your tonality. He said, you've got a structure and a map to follow to produce a great talk. But now your tone of voice has to shift. He said the problem with Aussies is at the end of each sentence, you have an upward intonation and everything sounds like a question rather than the Americans who sound like they're making statements. Even if you listen closely to an American, a question sounds like a statement or a command. And he said, you've got to go and get that under control. And so a couple of years back, I went back and reviewed some videos of mine from pre-2016. And he was right. Everything went up at the end, And I'd had some feedback, but I couldn't understand the feedback. People said, I watched the show, but I really don't know what you're talking about. I was like, well, I get it. Because the tone of voice didn't have the certainty and it didn't have the authority in it either.
Yeah, I coach a lot of TV, podcast hosts, expert hosts, and that comes up a lot. And it is tone control. one of the first things I was taught, this is like 30 plus years ago, we're going way back to the beginning, but one of the first things we were told is record yourself and we're going to play it out loud for everyone in the room to hear. Now, hearing your voice for the first time out loud is not the voice you hear in your head cavity. And so you think, wait, I don't sound like that. So you argue, you fight with the professor, your coach, whatever. You don't believe that's the voice. You have to start believing that's your voice. That's what people really hear. So that tone, that inflection, you have to work at this. This is your instrument. This is what people will listen to. And if it's like chalkboard scratching, no one's going to listen to it. If you have that high influx, I work with a lot of people, they drop off the last part of a sentence. They clip their words because they're dropping their voice down. Now it's a cue that I'm wrapping up, but if you can't hear that last few words, it's like a gymnast not sticking the landing on their great dismount and sticking it hard. You want to have that confident voice. You want to have the inflection, but you want to stick it so every word counts. People understand it. They respond to that. But that often requires a speech coach, public speaking coach. Someone's got to help you hear it because you don't hear it yourself.
I had that problem. And what I learned from my voice coach was that I didn't have enough air in the lung. And the last word, I'd run out of breath. So I was trying to push it out. And he said, what we're going to work on now is your breathing. And so I was breathing high in the chest. And that also signified a lot of anxiety and fear, because when you get anxiety and fear and you're speaking, the chest tightens up, the throat tightens up, and you're trying to push that air out, and the tongue goes hard. And so I had to learn how to breathe again and how to relax the vocal cords and how to use the tongue correctly. And I noticed in the first 6 months of having professional coaching, my sales increased by $100,000.
Yes. No, this applies to sales, public speakers, talk show hosts. All this applies to everyone. If you're using your voice and your voice is part of your brand, and that's part of it right now. When you go back to that brand conversation briefly, you are the brand, not the product you sell, not the book you sell. You are now the brand more than ever. So you have to shine. So I tell people, and this came out through the pandemic, great public speakers that I knew sat down because that's what everyone was doing. And they said, it's boring. They're not using their voice. They're not doing the breath like you were just describing. I told every one of my clients, stand up and give me your full energy. And every one of them said, that looks stupid. I'm in my room by myself. Why am I going to stand up? And they did it. And what happened was that breath opened up, the cavity opened up. And the other thing was their mind said they were back on stage and they delivered with passion and energy instead of being passive in a seat. So one of my biggest tips for everyone is stand up. You will deliver differently, more confidently. And some of those breathing things that we're discussing, they'll naturally go away because you're back into full acting presentation mode.
Mm-hmm. I've been sitting down for 4 years, and I had a photo. My wife sent it to me on WhatsApp. I did a stage presentation for 1,000 people here in Taiwan, and that was the second last time that I actually stood up and spoke 4 years ago. And I saw the photos on stage, and I thought, my gosh, I've been sitting down for 4 years. Yes. However, the energy projects very differently. And I know the difference from sitting down and standing up. It's a huge difference.
Oh, no, it's a huge, and I've been in radio and television for 30 plus years. But even if I do a virtual keynote, I've got a raised desk, and I raise a desk, raise the camera, raise the lights, and I'm back on a full stage. I know the difference even between what I do here and how I present and how I use my voice differently than when I get into a stage situation. And that's something that speakers, leaders, influencers, you got to learn how to use the different stages. There is the live in-person stage, and this is a stage. And that's one of the biggest things that I've been coaching entrepreneurs with is you now have a stage. You don't have to travel. You don't have to go through TSA. There's no bad food. You have a stage you can use every single day from your office, from your home, and you need to learn how to do this like a rock star.
I was doing a lot of travel pre-pandemic, and I would stand on a small stage, and I learned that most of the work that a leader is going to do is going to be in front of a small group for the rest of their life. They're going to have small group meetings. They're going to do small presentations to board members, to directors, and to investors. And as people transition and be promoted in a business, they've got to take these leadership roles. And instead of sitting in the audience, you've now got to be on the stage. And leaders really have to take that stage. They can't get anybody else to do the vocalizing. They've got to do it. As they transition from being one of the crowd to being the one on the stage, what do they need to know about what makes a great speaker?
Number one, you have to be natural. There is a confidence to what you need to do. There is acting involved in what you do. You have to be prepared. You cannot wing it. I mean, I've been speaking, you've been speaking for a long time. We still have to prepare, rehearse. Even if we've done it 100 times, we've still got to go back over it again. Every audience, every situation is different. But you first have to start with, this is me. Going back to you are the brand. The authentic nature of what we do as speakers, leaders, entrepreneurs, whether it's a big stage or small stage, is probably more important than ever before. The audience is looking for someone that I can relate to. They want to break the glass and be a part of a conversation. We got used to big stage performances the last couple of years after COVID. The audience has shrunk. People don't want to travel anymore, like you said. So now we're into an intimate conversation. So one of the things you need to do is take that big auditorium persona that you've worked so hard to create, and now you need to turn your talk into a backyard conversation. Pull up a stool. Walk, talk, sit down. And you need to make it sound like you're really talking to them one-on-one. And one of the biggest tips I give them from that confidence boost or from that voice boost, talk about you. I'm glad you're here today. It's great to see you. Tonight, you and I are going to talk about, you turn it now into a personal discussion. A lot of us go naturally to, great to see you all here. Especially here in the deep South, y'all comes out all the time. But
Y'all come back now.
Right. But you're making it sound like it's a big nebulous crowd. Even in radio, for all my years in radio, the first thing we were taught was, you're talking to one person over mass media. The best DJs, talk show hosts, they make it sound like they're talking to you. So there's a different confidence here. Because you're alone in a studio, you're alone in a small, intimate room, you're used to the big crowds and standing ovations. Now you have to figure out they have the same energy, same delivery, but it's maybe 300. It could be 50 people in an intimate arena. And you now have Q&A. You have regular interaction, not just theoretical questions and feedback. You really want to have that energy going. It's a whole different skill set. You're still publicly speaking. You're still trying to rock the stage, but now you're trying to land it into, it's you and I. Let's grab a drink and let's have a talk here today.
The importance of that word you. I learned about this many years ago, and when you say the word you, it's singular. There's no plural. There's no yous. You's a female sheep. There's no yous. It's only you. And every time you say the word you, it's like a quarter of a volt of electricity gets shot through the brain.
Yes.
And you start to connect. And I think a lot of people make that mistake that they have to be somebody different. And when I've done speakers training before, people will come out and the facilitator will say, okay, open your speech. Well, ladies and gentlemen.
Right.
And then the facilitator says, is that how you start a conversation with your family and friends? Would you do that around the dinner table? No, you'd lean forward and say, hey, g'day. How you doing?
Well, yeah, and you want to be strong and confident because you do want to have energy. You don't want to walk out, waddle to your seat, or waddle out the middle of the stage and look unconfident. They expect you to come out and go bang. Now, one of the things that I often coach is to help break that conversation, break the ice, make it more intimate. Often we get the hero story right away. Hi, I'm so-and-so. You heard my bio. Yeah, I've been traveling. It's been a long road. I've got another book coming out. We hear all the hero stuff. I coach and I say, hook them in with, today we're going to be talking about XYZ. Let me tell you about one of the most horrible experiences I've had. This is great for entrepreneurs, for leaders. that you want to really influence the crowd. Talk about the pain point, but make it personal about you. And then at the end, come back around and say, today, I'm going to help you never go through that experience because it was painful. It was crushing. And I'm here to help you never go through that again. Every audience is going to sit up and say, wow, they're a rock star, but they were really authentic right out of the chute. And I've come to hear the right guy that's going to help me because that's my pain point tonight. That's a different skill set for most entrepreneur leaders because they want to shine. They want to be everyone's hero in every performance they do. But you're setting it up in a different way that you will be their hero by being authentic.
One thing that I think is confusing a lot of people about speaking is that we tend to see this high energy, but it almost comes across as a military drill sergeant. And there's a lot of that on the internet, people yelling and screaming at the audience, and it's 60 minutes of just being yelled at.
Yes.
And they think they have to do that because this is what they're seeing. There's one American guy, Eric Thomas, and I think he's a great guy. He's well educated. He's a doctor, but it's just like he's in your face screaming the whole time.
Yeah.
And I'm in the audience virtually saying, I don't want to be yelled at. I don't want to be screamed at. I don't want somebody up in the face for the next 60 minutes. I want to enjoy this conversation.
Yes.
And I enjoy that when they have great energy, but I believe it's called constrained enthusiasm. It's like taking your bottle of S. Pellegrino, plenty of air in there, shaking it up, and you can feel the pressure build. And you know if you pulled the cap off, it would spray everywhere, but the cap stays on. And it's like they've bottled up that energy and you can feel it, but they don't let it explode. I find that personally to be very exciting and entertaining. You can feel it.
Yeah. When I coach people, I talk about the megaphone guy. They're on the street corner with the megaphone. You don't need that, man. No one's listening to you. They're all walking by you as fast as you can. A lot of people, you're right, do that. What you do need to learn is you need to learn how to use your voice like a roller coaster. Again, going back to the instrument, there's highs, there's low, there is intensity. There are those soft, tender moments. And you can pull people in. You literally get them leaning in your seat when you have been talking about something. You start dropping your voice down. You come to the edge of the stage. You get a little more intimate with it. They're literally right there with you. Now it's up to you to either destroy that intimate moment by going, whoa, or you bring them back up and back up. And you need to learn that skill set of the storytelling as part of this. Part of it is the intensity of the voice, the energy that you present. And then there's really also that side of, again, going back to the brand. Do you want to be the puffed up brand image that beats everybody in submission? Or do you want to be the brand person that they identify and they can't help but call because they associate, relate to you? You got to their heart, not to their head. You know, when we're doing that high used car salesman pitch, people cannot take that on for an hour. That's why we like roller coasters. Even TV shows, you cannot stay here all hour because you're going to be wiped out and you want to come back for another episode. So you have to figure out how to do the roller coaster and bring them around. But at the end, you need to stick it. What's the takeaway? What's your call to action? And that's where you're extra confident. Whether it's a soft challenge or the hard challenge, you want to let them know, here's what I think you should do. Work on this week. And you want them to know you are so rock solid confident. They're compelled to take your advice from the stage, write it down, and they will do it because you landed the plane perfectly. But you can't stay here the whole time. And that's where coaching comes in. That's where practicing now. You have to learn how to use the voice. It's your best instrument.
What's your take on the personal brand on and off the stage? Because I see people when they go on stage, they're a very different person from when they get off the stage. What's your take on that? So
I'm going to share a little story here because one of the best illustrations I could give you, years and years and years ago, I met William Shatner. And on stage, he is William Shatner that everyone sees on TV. Very high energy, very commanding, very strong personality, shall we say. I met him backstage. He was Bill. He was laid back, casual, comfortable. When his publicist came up And so there's people wanting to get your autograph. It was literally what you're describing. They flipped a switch in the back of his head, and he was back to Captain Kirk. And he was back to being the William Shatner that people talk about. You don't need to do that. That goes back to that whole authentic. Now, there is a performance side. I openly tell people, for me to get jacked up, for me to do something, most often backstage, before even a virtual, I'll put on one of my favorite rock songs. I'll air guitar it. I'll sing it. I'll get my energy up so I'm performance ready. But I'm still Rich. I'm still Trigger, as most people know me. So you need to have that brand identity sharp, that they know who you are, what you are. But you don't have to do that, flip a switch and become something else. You know, there are people in the radio business. We talk about the radio voice. Hi, welcome to 105.5. You don't need to do that. Again, you're now faking it and forcing it. I can still be very strong and confident with the voice I have, but I don't need to fake it. And that's a huge thing for a lot of people that want to grow in the speaking area. They think they have to fake the persona. Now, I've lived an amazing career. I've been very fortunate. People do call me Trigger at Walmart, or they call me Rich. It's kind of interchangeable at this point, and I've been very blessed with that. But I'm still me 24/7.
Is it easier to do that for you, for your own mental and emotional health?
Yeah, it is, because then I don't have to pretend like I'm switching for a crowd, for an audience. I don't have to be on. You know, I actually know people that when they know they're coming on, they literally have to step away from a crowd, step away, reset themselves. I'm ready to go because I'm able to just be me. And that's part of your personal brand development. That goes back to confidence. I'm talking to a lot of people about confidence these days because people have really taken a beating through pandemic. They are learning new tricks and trades of being on camera. They were never trained for it. They're running their Fortune 500 companies through these conversations like this, and they're like, what do I do with the microphone? Where do I look? How do I? There's so much confidence that's blown. And you have to go back to the basics and say, let me help you with confidence first as we rebuild the brand. And it's an ongoing conversation of transformation now.
And there's a lot going on. By the time you've got studio lighting, you've got your camera, you got your microphone, you got your mixing studio, you got your backdrop, and then you've got your multiple devices. There's a lot going on today behind the screen. And I believe when I was on stage pre-pandemic, it was very simple. You would rock up, you might have your A4 piece of paper, and you're talking. But now I've got to switch this camera and that camera. How's my volume? Nobody claps anymore, so you've got to give them artificial claps. It's all happening. And there's only a certain amount of bandwidth that you have. There's only a certain amount of tension that you can split between delivering your message and utilizing the equipment.
Well, and that brings up a great point. One of the things that I talk about, especially when I tell them to stand up, again, no one's there. Their laundry is right there. Their kids playing in the other room. I talk about the imagination. I go back to Walt Disney. Our best tool we have right now in this whole speaker, coaching, entrepreneur space is if you're on camera, you have to believe there are 500,000 people out there. You have to believe this. When I was a kid, I literally talked to my G.I. Joes. My mom and dad told me a story. I'd completely forgotten about it. I would line them up downstairs and I would talk to my G.I. Joes and Superman action figures. To this day, no matter what I'm doing, I believe there's a big audience out there. So I believe there is applause. I believe there's a laughter at the proper time. And through the pandemic, people did struggle with that because they couldn't see it. They couldn't feel it. There is partly, you have to step into what you want to create for your talk, for your board meeting. You have to create the vibe and believe the illusion in your head. And the interesting thing is people will go along with you. They will buy in to what you reflect and how you do it. Again, you're not over projecting, but there is a little bit of acting involved with this. There's a little of performance. If people don't want a monologue, boring time. So you do have to pull them in. And the big secret in, you're now a broadcaster, whether you like it or not, whether you're a CEO, whether you're a big company, small company, you are now a broadcaster. And part of that is there's an entertainment value. There's a communication value. And again, going back to you are the brand, you have to figure out how you are going to show up and do it over and over and over again.
For me, at the start of the pandemic, I found it very difficult to do broadcasts because we would use a Zoom or would use a webinar service. And it was me, my PowerPoint presentation, and just numbers on the screen. And these numbers on the screen would go up and they'd go down. So it was like, in my mind, I could see these people walking into the room, and that was exciting. Then I'd see the numbers drop off, and it's as if they were standing up and walking out halfway through the presentation. And you go through that emotional roller coaster. And I found that difficult. So what I wanted to see the faces. So I would ask my audience, could you turn on your camera? I'd like to see who's here. And if there was 100 people in the room, maybe 5 or 10 people would turn on their cameras. And although that was good, it was like, am I being rejected by the other 90 or 95? And I'd encourage them, come on, doesn't matter what you're doing, where you are, let's get on the camera. I want to see you. I want to make sure that my message is getting through, because talking on stage, you can see the response immediately. Is somebody blinking, nodding, sinking back in the seat, leaning forward, looking away? And it was amazing. People would show up in their underwear. There'd be ladies sitting there studying, and their husbands are walking around in their jocks in the background with their big belly out. and that was really interesting. And then we started to do larger groups. And then I realized that I couldn't see all of these people. So I ended up buying 2 49-inch monitors so I could see 100 out of the 1,000 people there at a time. But then it became so overwhelming for me that I actually went back and preferred the audience not to have on their camera. And I thought to myself, gee, these people on the radio who don't see anybody, my gosh, that's a skill, to be talking and not to be getting any feedback at all, but to continue as if you are.
No, and I did radio alone for 25 plus years. So yeah, being in a room by yourself. One of my tricks was, and I know a lot of professional broadcasters on radio do this. I didn't have a producer. I didn't have an engineer. It was me, myself, and I. I created a producer. And I would talk every so often about, hey, Fred, we're going to line that up for later on. Fred, make sure we get that. Now, I'm alone in my studio. I'm taking notes. And I talk to Fred, and I'm going to go back to it. And later on, I'm going to say, hey, thanks, Fred, for, lining that up. I'm here pulling little sound bites, doing things, but no one sees me. No one knows. I've created the illusion that I have a relationship going here. And people bought into the illusion again. So yes, a lot of people went through the very cycle you're talking about. They wanted the cameras, they wanted the people, they wanted it. And a lot of people now have said it's too overwhelming. They can't read the room virtually. They couldn't. It was becoming a frustration. So a lot of them are going back to, I'm going to own my stage. I'm going to perform like there's 1,000 people out there. Even if you have to put pictures in front of your cameras on the other side of the camera. I tell people to do that all the time. Do whatever you need to do to bring yourself to life, and they won't walk out the door. They'll stay there the whole time because you are what I call rocking the stage. You are owning your stage in a way. You're interesting. You're informative. The chat box may be blowing up, and you may mention some people out of the chat box, which I highly recommend. Call them by first name. Hey, Sue just dropped a comment in the chat. Thank you very much, Sue. Again, you're making that personal relationship, and it's not you all, but you can still own that. And the other big tip when it comes to all this is the confidence level is how much energy do you have to stay there? I can do long sessions. I've been doing this for a very long time. You could probably do very long sessions at the way you've grown, matured, and done what you do. But most people can't. And that's okay. They have to understand where they're at, what they want to achieve. And another way to pull this off, instead of doing a long webinar, a long feed, think like TV now. And for CEOs, I talk to CEOs about this. Your board meeting should not be a 2-hour virtual board meeting. Make it an episode. Do 15, 20 minutes. We're going to pick this up in 2 days. Here's your homework assignment, everybody. We'll come back here and we'll pick it up. And Fred is going to talk about the next thing on Wednesday's call. And you turn it into an episode. People can stay with you for a shorter time. Your energy will stay better. You're going to be more focused, and your audience is going to love to know there's more to come. You're feeding the monster to give them more, not a one-shot, one and done.
2022, I just delivered my 50th webinar on repeat. And I rehearsed the 90-minute script from top to bottom. And I logged onto the webinar, 400 people registered, 50 people turned up.
Yeah.
And then the 50 people turned up and there was no interaction in the chat box. And the frustration for me had built up. One, because it's invisible. I don't know who's there. And I'm going through and I'm in my 20th minute, not a response. 25th minute, not a response. 30th minute, I just reached downstairs and pulled the plug out. And I walked out of the office and wife said, "What are you doing?" She said, "We just paid all that money for marketing to get people to the webinar." And I said, "That's it. I'm done. I've had enough." I didn't get any response or any feedback. Now, it was nothing to do with the audience. You know, they could have been driving their car and thanks for them, they showed up. But for me, the frustration, because there was no feedback. I'd been so used to seeing people on a screen, raise your hand, say yes, one or two. But this night, it was nothing. And I've spoken to other people and they have their own fears. They have their own frustrations. They have their own doubts. They have their own limiting beliefs. Can they actually do this? Yeah. So for them to be able to speak effectively, yes, they've got to acquire knowledge and skill, but they've also got to develop that new attitude and that resilience. And that day for me, I had no resilience. Fuck it. I'm out. See you later. Power's off. With your years of experience, what fears and doubts and limiting beliefs start to go through their heads and hearts, and what do they have to break through to speak effectively?
Oh, that's a great question. And we've all gone through them. We've all gone through what you just described too. First of all, throw the numbers out. Stop looking at the numbers. Stop looking at attendees. You have to think about replays and reruns. Lucille Ball, Desi Arnaz were the first ones to ever do a replay in the history of television. I Love Lucy was going. It was a great success. People were watching it, but little Ricky and the show, the characters were all just progressing. And literally, they sat down as husband and wife, stars of the show, and said, what if we replayed one of our earlier episodes to get people caught up in the backstory? And they aired it, and people ate it up. From there, they just kept going and going, and syndication was born. The fact that you could take a show, Star Trek only ran for 3 years, the very first time Star Trek ran, the original series. It's now almost 60 years old. There's been how many different versions of Star Trek that have been born and growing. The number one version of Star Trek people still want to see is the original version. They still want to see Kirk, Spock, and McCoy because reruns work. The numbers will come in long term and long term. I talked to a lot of content producers and things, and they're one and done. Oh, I didn't get the numbers I wanted. That was a horrible webinar. Well, have you replayed it? Have you repackaged it up? Have you done a short to tease and drive them back to the replay? Why would I do that? It was a horrible webinar. No one came. You've already created the content. Put it on replay and build the audience, and they'll come. And they'll come, and they'll come. And that's one of the things that I think is the biggest confidence booster is you're not one and done. You're not stuck with the numbers. Build worthy content. Walt Disney has done this for years. Walt Disney has had great movies. It's going in the vault. It's going to be gone forever. It's never coming back out. 10 years later, they celebrate. We're pulling Cinderella out of the vault. Sales go through the roof. A new generation is hooked on Disney animation, and we watch it with our kids and our grandkids. We have to start thinking like media producers now. This is never going away. So executives, CEO, leaders, streaming content people, we have to start thinking like the studios do. You now have a catalog of production content. How can you repurpose it, repackage it, replay it, and grow your brand and your following? So when the next real official live one comes out, they're chomping at the bit.